experience. Are there any designers in the room? User experience designers? Raise your hand if you're a designer. Okay. So this talk is not for you because user experience is not just about the user interface. This is actually a talk for programmers, developers. And I've always wanted to do a talk, or this actually comes from a blog post on my site, but I've always wanted to talk about those user experience problems that aren't immediately visible or even visual, that are something that goes beyond the scope of what an interaction designer usually does. And so I came up with this. My name is Luis. I'm a software engineer at Equal Experts. By the way, we are hiring. And I care a great deal about UX, which is why I'm giving this talk right now. So first factor, or the most common problem in user experience nowadays on the web is performance. And doesn't this make you anxious? Don't you hate waiting, especially when you don't know what you're waiting for? By the way, I don't know if you've ever gone to GitHub and seen those spinner galleries some users have there, and you go there and pick the best spinner and copy and paste some code, and you paste it onto your site. To me, that's almost like an admission of failure, because hey, I couldn't make my site any faster, so here's the best one div CSS spinner I can come up with. But performance it's actually a bit like the common cold, you know, everybody gets it, but it's not that big a deal, so everybody lives with it. But actually, the common cold and web performance costs a great deal of money to a lot of companies. So take Google, for example. I think it was in 2010, Google allowed users to pick between 10 and 30 search results per page, and allowed users to choose how many results they would get. So yeah, 30 is better, so a lot of people went with that. More is better, right? Right? Well, it turns out that people who had picked 30 result pages actually engaged less with Google search than others. Traffic dropped by 20%. You know, and Google being Google, and they can't have a piece without taking a sample for color and clarity and consistency, they measured their performance, and they tried to figure out why people were engaging less with their search. And they figured out that the 30 results pages actually increased the rendering time by half a second, and a half a second meant 1/5 of their audience was gone. And that's 1/5 of their ad revenue as well. So this costs money, and especially in media, in print publications who are desperate for money. Take for instance, Financial Times. The engineering team ran a series of experiments where they introduced an artificial delay loading CSS so that it blocked page rendering. And what they figured out is that there was a very consistent loss of engagement across a user session the longer it took for pages to render. And this means fewer readers, fewer people engaging with their pages, and fewer ads seen and displayed and clicked. So we've gotten pretty good at measuring server performance and user metrics from the website's perspective, but we haven't actually had much data on actual biometric responses from people using those sites. And Ericsson ran an experiment. They got an EEG and they hooked it up to people using a mobile, actually this was for a mobile video streaming experiment. And they got people to use, to see a video that was buffering consistently. And they figured out that delays resulted in 38% increased heart rate. People actually got anxious, physically anxious, at delays in video streaming. The level of stress, and this is from their report, the level of stress caused by mobile delays was comparable to watching a horror movie. Now, this is scary stuff. And the media loves to harp on this. You know, this came out, I think, last year. Last year. This is an article on The Verge complaining about Apple and Google ruining mobile web for everybody because their browsers, they either lacked features or they were too bloated. And they do it without any sense of irony. Because if you look at this, you know, this page is 3 megabytes in volume. This is huge, and it took 330 requests. Most of this is ads, by the way, and I'll get back to ads in a bit, but it's insane. This is a 500-word article or a 1,000-word article. It doesn't take 3 megabytes. So what's a concerned web developer to do? We have all the tools right now. We have tools for measuring, and we have the tools to optimize this. And we have the tools to optimize this automatically. So you have to only worry about these things once. So you either have caching mechanisms, and it depends on your platform of choice, of course. You have compression and minification. This can be done either by something like a gulp workflow, or automatically by the web server if you use the page speed plugin for Nginx or Apache. This is done by Google. Or if you use HTTP2, concatenation comes, it becomes almost out of the box because it doesn't matter how many resources you have. And domain sharding is also solved automatically by HTTP2. And service worker, which is now used, you've probably seen the progressive web apps talk. Service worker will allow you to have offline experiences. So even if the network is offline or even worse, unreliable, this limbo state where the device thinks it's online, but it's actually not. And you can still ensure that users have a responsive site and a responsive web app to engage with. But this kind of optimization for time isn't the only reason why optimization is important. Especially if you're on a data plan, and some mobile carriers in Portugal will give you 100 megabytes free just for you to try out their internet. And 100 megabytes isn't much. You know, it allows you to read 1 Verge article per day for a month, as long as you do nothing else. Last year, at the height of the mobile ad blocking furore, the New York Times ran a report comparing various news sites for ad content and bloat, basically. And at the top of this came Boston.com. And in the United States, using a 4G connection, the Boston.com, a typical Boston.com webpage took 40 seconds to load and forced you to spend 30 cents of your money just so you could watch ads. And you know, the proportion of content is ridiculous. I think it's virtually nothing. And this is a 4G connection, 40 seconds on a 4G connection. Now imagine how long it would take on a GPRS connection with a network that's unreliable, on a data plan that's really, really expensive. And this is where a browser like Opera Mini comes in. Who's familiar with Opera Mini? Who's ever of it? Have you heard of Opera? Do you use Opera Mini? Have you ever used Opera Mini? So Opera Mini is interesting because it's not a typical web browser. So yes, it allows you to see web pages, but Opera Mini has a mode that pipes your requests through a proxy server, and that proxy server optimizes the web page for you before you even get it. And it aggressively optimizes the web page, so much so that it breaks all the JavaScript that you have in there and most of the CSS that you have in there. So if you're not optimizing your web app or your web page with graceful degradation or progressive enhancement, you'll probably won't see anything using one of these browsers. And the thing is, this browser should not be neglected because it's used on a lot of developing countries, and it's used by, I think, 300 million users, which is roughly equivalent to the entire population of the United States. So if your market is truly global, and you care about user experience of these people, then you should cater to them. And you can't just tell them, oh, you should get a decent browser, because sometimes they're on a Nokia cell phone with a Symbian operating system that doesn't support anything else, and Opera Mini runs on all of these things. And it's got a 5.74% global usage. And this is not just mobile devices, this is all browsers. And you can go on caniuse.com and see that this hasn't been updated in a while, but you can see updated stats on that side. It's okay. Something else that's not performance. Security. So text-based passwords are the most common form of authentication on the web. And if you're on the web, if you're online, you probably have at least one password. You probably even reuse some of your passwords, which you shouldn't do, but a lot of people do. It's like 70% of people reuse their passwords. Oh, shame on you. I reuse my passwords sometimes. And and if you're really, really bad at it, your password is password. I like number 3 because they just added 2 digits to throw those hackers off. That'll do a lot. So the thing is, people are really careless with their passwords. People hate to remember complicated things. And this is why security experts and sysadmins will come up with security policies and force you to pick specific passwords with a specific complexity. So you have to pick a mix of letters and numbers and special characters and a minimum length. And sometimes even have to change the password every few weeks or every few months, just in case some attacker figures out the password and tries to do something nasty with it. And people really hate this thing. It's like the equivalent of telling you to eat your vegetables. You may not like it, but it's for your own good. But for many, many years, not much attention was paid to the relationship between these security policies and actual human behavior. So there's this bit of research that was done by researchers at Carnegie Mellon University and NIST. And they got 6,000 people together and they asked them, okay, will you come up with passwords to satisfy these password checking algorithms in varying orders of annoyance, basically. And 30% of people found the process of coming up with a password that was sufficiently complex really annoying, and most worrying of all, 31% of participants admitted to having written down their password so they could remember it later. So what's the point of asking people to come up with something complicated that couldn't be easily figured out if they're going to write it anyway and make it visible? Oh, surely you think you believe in human competence? This doesn't happen. Well, it does happen. So this is an interview. They aired this from the TV5 offices last year, I think, or this year. And they interviewed this journalist, and they didn't even bother to check if they had any passwords posted in the back. So turns out this aired, and later that day, all of TV5's social media presence was taken over by ISIS, where they ran their propaganda. And by the way, their password, their mot de passe, what was it? Mot de passe, yes. Okay, so what's the point of asking people to come up with complicated things if they're going to forget it anyway or write it down. So these two passwords, these are two example passwords. They satisfy the same kinds of rules. They have a mix of letters and numbers. They have a special character, and they have a mix of upper and lower case. And so they're of more or less equivalent complexity. Some password checkers will reject the one at the bottom because it has character repetition. So what do you think is the one that's most secure? So the time to brute force this is virtually equivalent. I'm not considering dictionary attacks or anything of the kind, just pure brute force, just checking every character combination. It's equivalent, even though one is much easier to remember than the other. And this is not actual password strength. So if you go on that website, you'll see why. And the other thing is that security experts don't always agree on what those policies should be. So for instance, Microsoft will not accept a password that's longer than 16 characters. And they say it's entropy, it's character variety that counts. And some other expert will say, no, it's size that matters. The longer the password, the more secure it will be. And people don't agree, and this confuses people. This confuses your users, because how are you supposed to educate them about online security if you don't necessarily agree with this, on these things? And why would Microsoft not accept a password that's longer than 16 characters? It's not like it's going to hurt me anyway. So stop confusing people. But by the way, there is a reason why we know that password is the most commonly used password. That's because we developers and engineers have dropped the ball on security on several occasions. And we do it by storing passwords unencrypted, not properly salting our hashes, or sometimes even something as simple as a password recovery form that sends out a user's password or a new password over email unencrypted. That's really bad, and that's how passwords get lost and systems get compromised. And if you think say a password recovery mechanism is bad UX, you should try identity theft, because these kind of things can really ruin a person's life. And speaking of life-ruining experiences, I'm totally addicted to this game. Does anyone here play Destiny? Okay, so have you checked out the expansion? So you're not an Iron Lord yet. Okay, so for those of you who don't know what Destiny is, this is a science fiction shooter game for consoles, Xbox and PS4. And in this game, you play this super soldier who goes on missions killing aliens who are invading the solar system. And you do this over and over again until the solar system is saved, or the people who make the game stop making money out of it, whichever comes first. And the thing about this is, by the way, this is my character. His name is Bob. And the thing about this is that you go on these missions, and the best rewards you can get come in these yellow packages. These yellow packages convert to random equipment for your character. Random weapons, random armor, and this is usually pretty special stuff that comes in yellow packages. And so you go on these missions and you fight some alien boss over and over again, and you get this thing like 3 or 4 times in a row, and this is, although it comes in a yellow package, it's actually the worst weapon in the game. And it's really frustrating when you get this for the 4th time, like it happened to me. It gets really annoying. And you go online trying to search for answers, why is the game punishing me with this crap? And you see a lot of people complaining about the RNG. And the RNG is, you could use the letters to spell angry, or enraged, or frustrating. But it actually stands for random number generator, which is what governs how these rewards get doled out in the game. The thing about random number generators is that whenever a random number generator is involved anywhere, people are going to be disappointed by it somehow. Take, for instance, Spotify. When they introduced their playlist shuffle feature, they actually got emails from people complaining that their shuffle was broken. We're getting the same song or the same artist repeatedly, 3 or 4 times in a row. You should do something about it. They didn't understand it because they were using a perfect shuffle algorithm. You couldn't get any better than that. And the thing is, our perception of what randomness is a little bit off. So these 2 plots show a random distribution and a distribution that's been skewed to appear random. So can you guess which one the truly random is? If you think it's the one on the left, raise your hand. If you think it's the one on the right, raise your hand. So yeah, the truly random one is the one on the left. And the thing about random numbers is that they have no memory of what comes before, and it's perfectly natural that they'll cluster up like this. So they don't get evenly distributed like people expect them to. And that's why people get disappointed by these, either because they got the same random reward, random crappy reward several times in a row, or because they get the same artist from Spotify. And there's a little paradox in this, because we have to actually design our random number generators. And there's a paradox in that in order to make a random number generator feel more random, we have to make it less random so that people aren't disappointed. So this 999, it could be random. You don't know. You never know. So, okay, hopefully I've given you a few examples of how things that aren't necessarily from the user interface actually affect user experience and aren't bound by the 4 edges of your computer screen, of your device's screen. So there are factors of speed, money, security, privacy, and basic expectations that aren't fulfilled by graphic user interfaces. I lied at the start because I said this wasn't for designers. It's actually for designers as well. And the thing is, well, I'd like to hear you out. What do you think design is? Come on. Give me your definition of design. Someone that draws stuff, so visual stuff. What's design? What do you think design is? Come on, one more.
Design that functions and is also visually appealing.
Okay, so there's an element of aesthetics to design. And my favorite definition of design comes from this guy called Victor Papanek. He wrote a book called, it's actually from that book. He wrote a book called Design for the Real World. And he says that design is a conscious and intuitive effort to impose meaningful order. And what really sold me out on this definition was the words conscious and meaningful. And this is a vision of design that's not entirely familiar to people, at least to people who aren't designers. Because there is an element of planning in design. This isn't about aesthetics, this isn't about ergonomics, this isn't about usability, this is about conscious thought and empathy and intent. There's actually another great quote that I heard a couple of weeks ago, that design is the rendering of intent. That's a great quote. And it's all about intent. It's all about expressing purpose, communicating purpose, and allowing, especially if you're talking about interaction design, allowing other people to express their purpose and make it clear. And lots been written about how designers ought to learn how to code. And this is why I say that This is also for designers. A lot's been written about how every designer should learn how to code. And I don't disagree with it. I think it's important for designers, the digital designers, to know about the tools and the materials of their trade. But I think this is more important. Every coder should learn design. And they should learn design in the sense of consciously thinking about the people who are using the stuff they build, of empathizing with these people. And a lot of projects, look back on the projects that you've been involved in. Have you ever had this disconnect between the design team and the developer team? So that problems like the ones I've mentioned, especially performance, which is what I've seen more often, fall through the cracks because no one owned that problem. The designers don't want to worry about the size of the images they're including, and developers don't want to worry about the problems designers bring onto the table. Nobody owns these problems, and they end up not being owned and not being resolved in the end. And who suffers from this? The end user. The end user suffers from this. And that's not what UX is about. UX is about giving these people who already give us their time, their attention, their money, sometimes even their secrets for the opportunity to use our products. And we should be able to care about them. We should be able to step up to the plate and say, okay, I'm going to own the performance problem. I'm going to own the security problem. I'm going to come up with a security policy that's humane and that's based on actual facts rather than what I've read somewhere or based on tradition. And giving a crap is like the ultimate competitive advantage. And it shouldn't really take a job description to tell you that. And that's all. Thanks. Any questions? Anything? Complaints? I also did complaints. Was it loud? Oh, on the other round. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is, what kind of resources like courses or websites do you recommend for a coder to start in this designer world or designer mentality, or trying to understand like the basics?
It's a good question.
Thank you.
I don't actually have an answer for that. If you know a designer, if you work with a designer, what I really recommend is that you work directly with them, because that's the best way that you'll understand their problems, and the best way for them to understand your problems too. And it's this communication and this cooperation that really drives a project forward. I don't have any resource that you could probably look it up on Google. There's plenty of design resources for you to look at, even design publications. There are plenty of good articles. Even people from Google, they usually bridge this design and developer gap that exists. And they talk about things like accessibility and usability. And they're probably good people to follow on Twitter and so on. But best thing I think you can do is work with your design team and stick with them and listen to their problems and communicate your problems to them so that there's nothing that gets left over or forgotten in your projects. Anything else? Can I be released now? So no more questions. Okay, thank you.